So tell us about the Soviet propaganda, because you mentioned how the Soviets were busy rewriting history books and designating, or rather dubbing, those Jewish councils as Zionists and colluders, how the Jews actually did the Holocaust to themselves. And that goes back to how, certain claims in history are so much and so often repeated that they get inculcated in the brain and in the common culture, and they become part of common wisdom. And I think the Soviets were world-class masters of this art called propaganda. They used narrative manipulation as really a state tool against their adversaries. And one of the things that was interesting to me was that to see like the equivalence in some of those narratives. For example, how the Soviets claimed that basically Jew, and that's a narrative that I'm happy if you can elaborate on, a narrative that Zionists and Jewish people were actually advising secretly to Western governments behind the scenes, and so pulling them to the war against the Soviets and so on. How this was basically that's after World War II, right? The Soviet Union claiming how Zionist council and organizations are behind social fragmentation in Eastern Europe. And we can hear this claim even during the Nazi era, when Goebbels and Hitler themselves called it the Jewish War. They said that Jewish people were advising, how can you explain that both Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill are all three of them are united against us, where all three have such converging, varying interests. So that rings as well today to those claims made by Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and others, saying Jewish advisors led President Bush to invade Iraq and Afghanistan. Those are Jewish advisors who today are demanding Trump to intervene in Iran. It is Israel that is pulling us to foreign forever wars. And so this line in history is incredibly telling about how narratives start off as state propaganda and they become a natural part of our lives.
Well, you can absolutely see that they're reusing these old charges, that the Jews are doing it all to themselves. What was very surprising for me, that after the Bondi Beach shooting in Australia, even in Hungarian social media, these people who I'd never seen before, I don't know where they came from, they just started popping up. I'm not sure who's paying them, but someone has got to be paying them, and they were pushing this narrative that it was actually the IDF who started shooting Jews to death in Australia on this beach, and they even created these fake photos, probably with artificial intelligence. And my impression is that nowadays, basically, anything can happen in the world. I mean, you can think about the shooting of Charlie Kirk, you can think about the shooting in Australia, or natural disasters, or the Epstein files, or whatever. And there is going to be this kind of concentrated, well-organized media campaign spanning across countries and continents, immediately blaming it on the Jews and Israel. It seems like it's organized. I'm not sure by whom. I'm not an expert on this, but I have done some research into Soviet propaganda and anti-Zionist Soviet propaganda, especially in Hungary. And what I can definitely tell you is that none of the articles appearing in the Hungarian media at the time, none of the interviews which were happening on TV and radio, and this stuff before the internet. This was communication. This was reaching huge masses. Everybody was reading this stuff and listening to this stuff, and especially because Western newspapers and radio was banned in Hungary. You were not allowed to read and listen to Western media. In fact, you could go to prison for it. This was basically the only thing that was reaching people. And what I can tell you is that none of the articles and none of the interviews which were happening could happen without the supervision of the Hungarian Secret Service. If you look at the files of the contemporary Hungarian intelligence, and there was something called the department responsible for the fight against domestic reaction. This was they had a very fancy title, and what they were basically doing was they were fighting against all sort of non-communist or non-Moscow oriented political movements within Hungary, and this included everything from the Catholic Church to Jewish organizations to actual neo-Nazis to social democrats to liberals. So everybody was put into this category of domestic reactionary movements. and they were monitoring them. They were reading their letters. They were bugging their homes. They were bugging their phones, and they were trying to break up their circles to find division within their ranks and deepen these divisions and alienate people and isolate people. So they had this whole kind of secret service agency focusing on this, and you can read these files in the archives today. And they were very, very focused on the discussion around Israel. In fact, the documents state that Israel was one of the chief enemies or arch enemies of Hungary, which is very interesting to see, because you would think that Hungary was not that involved in the Middle East. You would think that the United States would be like the nemesis, or the United Kingdom would be the nemesis, or West Germany. But one of the biggest targets of Hungary was Israel, and at least in this kind of propaganda. And whenever something happened in the world, they had their agents, they had the people they were paying or they were in touch with, or the party members. And unfortunately, some of these people, in fact, quite a few of them were from the Jewish community. They were kind of token Jews used to spread these lies and misinformation. And they were immediately told to focus on Israel, to attack Israel, to say that Israel was behind the wars, that Zionism was behind the wars, that all the conflicts in the Middle East can basically be traced back to the creation of the State of Israel. Before the State of Israel, apparently the Middle East was this amazing, peaceful place. After the creation of the State of Israel, apparently everything had turned bad. And it's very, very strange to see these actual directives and orders in the documents of the handlers, because of course all the agents in Hungarian media, there were a lot of agents in media, and they all had handlers, right? They had these Hungarian Secret Service officers, who were not wearing uniforms, they were plainclothes officers, and who they were reporting to. And they got their orders usually written down on a piece of paper, and you can see that it's crazy that an article would appear in the Hungarian language Jewish media in Israel. That they had this big newspaper. In fact, it still exists today. It was called Új Kelet, the New East. It's a very, very old Hungarian language newspaper in Israel. So they were, of course, reading every issue. And an article appeared there that they didn't like. So they had a Hungarian journalist react to it immediately in the Hungarian media, and they were told what to write. And then they reviewed the article together, and they decided if it was good or not, if something had to be changed or not. So these people were under very tight control. And the Hungarian Secret Service was actually, it was kind of irrational. They were like crazy focused on Israel and everything related to Zionism. From a certain point of view, it makes no sense, and that's why I'm saying that it's. I think it's at the end of the day, it's anti-Semitic, because even through if you want to see, as a kind of a historical experiment, you want to see things through the lens of the Hungarian communist state. You want to see it from their perspective, what were their interests and what were not serving their interests. I mean, even through that, you cannot explain this kind of mania, this kind of crazy obsession with Israel. Hungary had a sizable Jewish community even after the Holocaust. So that might explain the interest to some extent, but even that doesn't explain why the Hungarian Secret Service were so focused on this. And what I'm trying to get to at the end of the day is that after going through hundreds and hundreds of these files, and all of these files are very thick, hundreds of pages each file, and I've read through hundreds of these files in the Hungarian Secret Service archives, I just had to come to the conclusion that everything revolving around Israel and everything around the discussion around the Middle East and the Arab countries and this entire Israeli-Palestinian conflict was very tightly controlled by the Hungarian Secret Service, who of course were basically, I'm not going to say that they were run by the KGB, but they were very, very strongly cooperating with the KGB. The Soviet embassy in Hungary was full of KGB officers who were regularly talking to the Hungarian officers. They had these common work meetings. They were what was called a friendly secret service. There were not a lot of friendly secret services, but some of them were in this category, and the Soviet Union's KGB was definitely in this category. So when they gave a request to Hungary, the Hungarian Secret Services immediately did it and tried to fulfill these requests. So at the end of the day, this very vile and evil and manipulative discussion around Israel and the Holocaust and the Jewish people in general in Hungary was very, very strongly controlled by the state and by the Secret Service. So nothing was an accident. It was very, very rare that something accidental would happen. Most of this stuff was no coincidence. It was directed and orchestrated. It was kind of a show for the people to see, the evil Jew show, which was in your newspapers and on your radio and on your TV every day. And Israel was very, very obviously pointed at as the source of most evil in the world, along with the United States, of course.
Well, why does it all sound too familiar, eh, László? Well, we're all happy that Hungary today is a very different place, and in fact, Israel's strongest ally in Europe, and we're very grateful for it. Don't miss a moment. Hit the subscribe button right now and be the first to watch the next episode.